John Dessler, 90-year-old Holocaust survivor. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man.
Wow.
Hey, it's great to be with you guys. Yeah, it's amazing. You know, I'm 90 years old. I hit 90 last October, and
Dino, you should work his mic. Make sure that mic's in front of his mouth, and maybe prioritize that over the action cam. Or John, what am I doing? You've got your wits about you.
Yeah,
you look and sound great for 90.
Kind of stuff before.
Yeah, talk right into it. Like, get pretty close.
Right over here. This is good, huh?
Yeah, pretty good.
Okay.
Even closer, if you don't mind. Just have that thing right up against you.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, like that.
There we go.
Alles gut, alles in Ordnung.
That sounds
All right,
good.
Were you speaking German right there?
He was speaking
yeah.
German.
Oh, wow.
So you were. I guess we got to back up to the start.
Let me give you a little recap, okay?
Yeah.
You want a little bio, okay?
A bio, yeah.
I was born in Berlin, Germany in 1931, and that was just 2 years before the Nazis took over the country.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what was going on, obviously. The first contact I had with any kind of Nazism was in I was 8 years old, 1938, 1939, when the doorbell rang in the morning, and they used to have a joke, you talk about black humor, and the joke was, if your doorbell rings at 6 in the morning, the chances are that it's not going to be the milkman. And what they meant by that, it's the Gestapo. To come in and, probably arrest you, which they did with my father.
Yeah.
My father was a dental surgeon.
Wow.
And we were, like, I guess you'd call it an upper middle class family in Berlin. My mom had come from a German Jewish family that had lived in Germany for at least 3 generations, from the mid 1800s, I suppose. And we were Jewish, but the German Jews were very different from Eastern Jews because they were much more educated, and they had been allowed into Germany already in the early 1800s, as opposed to many other countries where they still lived in ghettos and they were segregated, so to speak.
Were you, John, a little anti-Semitic toward the Eastern Jews?
Isn't that interesting that you asked that question? Well, I wasn't. But most German Jews were. They considered it.
Those
was like
dang Jews.
It's like if you're
Polish
living in
Jews.
New York and you're educated and you're sort of at least middle class, upper middle class, and suddenly all these people came in from down south and they hadn't had any kind of education, and they wanted to blend in. German Jews always wanted to be, and my father was typical of that. He had been already in the cavalry in the First World War.
Oh, wow.
And
Probably fought alongside Hitler.
well, no, not for Hitler. This is First World War.
Hitler was in the trenches in the First World War.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly
They were probably
right.
shoulder to shoulder.
Exactly.
Und Scheißen Potato Masher!
Yeah, that's
Throwing
right.
him at the French.
Yeah, exactly.
Your granddaddy and Arnie.
Yeah.
Wow.
Arnie Hitler.
But,
Father.
bottom line is that the German Jews considered themselves Germans first, and they never really talked about, there was no Yiddish spoken. My mother told me once, when she was a kid growing up, and her maiden name was Mandelbaum, and they had been in the country, that whole family had been in the country for 2 or 3 generations, and she said, if anybody in my home, the Mandelbaum family, when she grew up, she said, if anybody used any Yiddish words, like, whatever, I'm not even saying schmuck or anything like that, or any kind of Yiddish words, her father, Alexander Mandelbaum, who was one of the biggest diamond merchants in Germany at the time, he would look at her very sternly and say, we don't speak that kind of language in this house.
Wow.
So that was kind of it. So obviously, I was 8 years old when my father got arrested, and after 3 or 4 days with the Gestapo, he got out. He had patients that were in Paris that were with the French consulate. So he was able to get out, and he said to my mother, you and the boy join me as soon as you can. Pack up all of it. We lived in like a 10-room apartment. His office was part of it, and pack up everything. So we ended up like with 40 or 50 crates of all of our furnishings and everything. And a
You
year,
were well off, very well off. It sounds
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
Bunch of
I
crates,
think so.
bunch of rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a year later, my mother and I left, and at that point I
I gotta
was
stop you
almost
for a second,
9
John.
years old.
Why did the Gestapo release your father?
They released him. Well, they arrested him first of all because
for
in
jaywalking.
1935 the Nazis had these Nuremberg laws. They were called the Nuremberg laws, which made Jews essentially non-citizens. And they said, if you're an accountant or a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer, you are no longer able to practice that.
Is it
You're
basically
just-
like Jim Crow?
You just can't do it. You have to, that's it. He continued anyway. He said to himself, fuck this. I remember my father saying to me, I asked my father years later, when we were in the States, and I was in my 20s, I said, so why didn't you get hip to what was going on with the Nazis? He said, we thought all of this is going to blow over.
Yeah.
This guy's a little too crazy. And the followers and all of that, I mean, millions of people were Sieg Heiling and following him, following Hitler. And he thought it was all going to blow over. Well, it didn't blow over. And by the time my mother and I joined my father in Paris, I was 9 years old. And within a couple of days of joining him in a hotel that he had been living in for a year, he said, Hans Wolfgang, which was my original name. That's a good German name.
Wow,
Hans
that's a good
Wolfgang.
Wolfgang.
It's a good German name.
Hans Wolfgang
That's a
Dessler.
G name, bro.
Austin
And,
Schlosser.
so he named me after a famous German author and poet, Goethe. But he thought that was a good name to give me. So when we arrived in Paris, like within 2 days, my father pulled me aside and said, "Your name is now going to be changed to Jean-Jacques.
Oh.
You're going to learn to speak French.
Wow.
You're going to be put into this boarding school."
So your name was changed to hide from the Nazis.
Yeah.
What
yeah.
about some blonde hair
to
dye?
Jean-Jacques.
What? So John Jacques, I think
I like it.
some blonde hair dye, like a New York Yankees ball cap. How can we make this guy look as Protestant as possible?
So so he said 3 things. You're going to learn to speak French. You're going to change. Your name is going to be changed to Jean-Jacques, and you will never ever tell anybody that you're Jewish. From now on, anybody asks you your religion, you tell them you're Lutheran.
Okay.
Lutheran.
I said, okay. I didn't know from Lutheran. I didn't know from Jewish. I knew nothing. I was 9 years old.
Right.
Did you have to walk around with a big pork sandwich in your hand at all times? That would have been a
to
good
make sure.
technique.
Yeah, that would have been a good cover, right?
Yeah,
Just
good
the
cover.
2 pieces of bread stuffed with pork.
I didn't have
No
any of that.
condiments or lettuce.
So I was in the
pack of
sporting
bacon.
school with a bunch of guys. Like I think there were like 40 other kids there, and I made my first friends. Learned to speak French very quickly.
John, did you have to get recircumcised?
No,
You got to think about these sorts of things.
no. But I never had to show anybody my schmeckel. I didn't.
Lucky you.
Nobody said, "Let me see who you are." And
Wow, let me
so
see who you are.
We asked this guy to show his schmeckel before we hired him.
Yeah, before we hired him, we had to make sure he was a real German.
So that's how it went. And I got acclimated pretty quickly. I don't remember being homesick. I made a couple of friends there. I learned to speak French fluently. And there we were in a town called Lozère in the middle of France.
Wow.
And after a year, the woman who was in charge of the school called all the boys together and said, we have some bad news.
Uh-huh.
We were just invaded yesterday by the
Oh,
Germans.
the
Germany
Germans.
invaded us. We're at war. And your parent is going to pick you up either tomorrow or as soon as possible.
And I just want to ask a little bit before we get
Yeah.
into the dark times in Paris. John, does part of you ever look back and think, you know what? Auschwitz would have been preferable versus hanging out with those French dickheads. Because when I went to
No
Paris,
way. No,
when I
we-
went to Paris, let me tell you, John, I wanted to kick everybody I met right in the cooch and or nutsack.
Well, they didn't treat him like an American, Danny.
See,
They
I went
treated
there-
him like one of it. He was
No,
blending in.
I was just this kid.
I tried to blend in too,
I tried
John.
to hide the fact that I was a German.
I was trying to
Yeah.
hide the fact that I was American. I went up to a vendor and I went, je voudrais un pomme frites, s'il vous plaît. And they're like, speak American, speak English.
Well, your accent's terrible. You should have learned French better, like our boy John did.
yeah.
Je voudrais un crepes, mademoiselle.
Sounds
Is there a bit of
terrible.
an American accent? A bit.
Well, you know, when you're young, I'd say if you're under the age of 10, because I've
Yeah.
had some friends who came around that time years ago, and they never lost their accent, whether
Right.
it was you know, German or French or whatever, refugees, you know. And you have it here. You have it in L.A.
Yeah.
People that are probably living here for, you know, decades, and they still have Spanish accents if
Yeah,
they're from
it's true.
Mexico or for Central America. No, so I blended in very quickly. I don't know if it was just a natural talent or it was like I got hip to, you know, I better blend in. So I just learned to speak French pretty
For your own
quickly.
safety.
But
Stop
after a
shaving your
year, they
armpits,
called us
started chain
together. My
smoking.
mother picked me up the following day and took me back to Paris. And by then we were at war. France was at war with Germany. And my mother was living in this little apartment with just, you know, a bedroom. I slept in the same room with her. I said, "Where's Papi? Where's my father?" She said, "Oh, he was arrested first by the French,
Jesus.
being a foreign national.
Fucking French.
And then when they figured out that he was a refugee and not a Nazi, they threw him in the French army. So he ended up in the French army for the 2 or 3 months that the French
That was
even were around.
at
Right,
least that
we're
was
around,
chill
right.
duty. All he had to do was this.
Yeah, that's right.
Listen, John, I'm telling you right now, you and your childhood pop gun would have put up a better defense than the French army.
Yeah, oh yeah, they were terrible. I mean, they capitulated in under, I think it was like 3 months or something.
Three
like that.
months.
And they had the biggest army in Europe at the time.
Really?
Yeah.
They had a couple of million,
Untalented.
and they had this big Maginot Line, and I mean,
yeah.
all this
So much for
it
that.
came to nothing.
Yeah,
you know.
Wow.
so much for that, the Maginot Line. Hitler made it to Paris at the time it would take Mudflap to make it to Paris.
Yeah, that's right.
In a slow trot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mudflap's a fat friend of
Oh,
ours,
yeah.
John.
He's very
yeah,
obese.
Absolutely. So when I got back to Paris to see my mother, from the very first night that I was with her, sleeping on a couch in this little apartment in Neuilly, which is in the outskirts of Paris, and it was near the Renault auto factory. And the reason I mention that is because we had bombings every night because the Germans were trying to bomb the Renault,
Renault,
auto
yeah.
factory because they were making, you know, weapons and arms and
Yeah.
tanks and all
I
kinds of
thought
stuff.
they were just bombing them because they knew
So
French
it
automobiles.
was like within
Not
3 or
very
4
good.
days of that whole scene of bombings every night and air raid shelter and cramming in with other people. And I did a painting fairly recently, like about 7 or 8 years ago. That was a memory that I had of me standing outside in the courtyard before going in the air raid shelter and German planes with bombs coming out.
Jesus.
Seeing all that. So I tell you guys, man, by the time I was there for 5 days, 5 nights of air raids and bombings every night, my fingers, I was biting my nails so bad my fingers used to bleed.
Jesus.
It was just terrible.
You just thought one might land on your place and
Oh,
that'd be
yeah, of
kaput.
course.
That's a good. It sounds like a good painting.
Oh,
I
yeah,
actually,
yeah.
I actually
mean,
painted
that's
this.
when I first realized what war is, you know?
Right. That's a,
I mean, I
what
didn't
war
give
is.
it a name or anything. I said, oh, yeah, they're trying to kill us.
Kill us, right? They're trying to kill us.
They're trying to kill us.
I painted
Yeah, what
this
did you
thing,
wanna say,
John.
Danny?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I painted this thing.
Uh-huh.
I
He
was
war, and they were
Yeah,
trying to kill
I
him.
painted
trying to
too.
kill him,
I
right?
painted this thing based on the Spanish Civil War, and you know, like the Germans just testing out their planes
Yeah,
on this
that's right.
small village called Guernica.
Yeah.
And I just thought that's not right, so I drew this mosaic of a bunch of cows and people
Wow. That's
strange.
huddling into a house.
Sounds like what Picasso might have drawn. Are you talking about the famous Picasso painting, Guernica?
I painted Guernica. That's what I called
Oh,
it.
really? That
Yeah.
That masterpiece it's in Spain, I think.
Yeah, it's in Spain now.
Your boy laid brush to canvas
Wow.
and gave man birth to it, Leo.
That's unbelievable.
I painted Guernica.
Guernica, my father said he saw it when it was in New York, and he went every day for a week. It was there for 7 days.
Tell him he's fucking welcome.
that you you got John. You got
Yeah,
John on that
I'm a
one.
good painter too. So to back up, you
So
you
what-
painted this thing recently to capture the fear you felt when
Yeah.
all that was
Oh, yeah.
going on.
Unbelievable fear.
Right.
Unbelievable fear. And it just stayed. It didn't get better because, you know, the war got worse.
Yeah.
And after about 3 or 4 weeks, everybody was trying to get out of Paris because the German troops were only about 15 miles away. We could hear the cannons and everything. And everybody was trying to flee the city.
On
Now, this is a
bicycle,
city-
on foot.
Yeah,
I've seen the-
whatever.
I've seen
and
the
on a
video
train.
of it.
So my mother and I
Train.
got on a train waiting like for almost a day to try to get on to
Jesus.
anything heading south, you know.
Right.
So we ended up in this little place on the Spanish border, but we couldn't get across. And we had one suitcase is all we had with us, just trying to get away. And we stayed in this little pension in Biarritz and for about a couple of weeks. And then one morning I remember hearing the Germans down below on the street, and I opened the shutters of this room that we were in, and there they were marching in military trucks and stuff down there.
Jesus.
And my mother said, "Quick, come over here." And she had no frame of reference. My mother was like, a lady that grew up in a very upper middle class kind of family.
Yeah.
She had demonstrated over the next years incredible strength. So she said, "Go by the window, open the window a little bit." And she took all of our papers, our passport, our identity cards, anything that identified us, and burned them in the sink right in the room that we were staying in.
Wow.
And she said, "From now on, if anybody talks to you, you only speak French, and we'll only speak French. And if anybody says, 'Where's your paper?' or anything like that, you just say, 'We lost everything. We were bombed out in Paris.'"
The sad part is
And
they
that
got,
was it.
They
So-
got charged
so-
5
so-
francs for a smoking violation in the hotel room.
No,
The
Yeah.
manager came up. He's like, "What is this?
Yeah.
It smells of smoke."
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Yeah,
he
it's
was
just
smoking too.
incredible.
Wow.
So yeah,
that was
that's
smart
how
of her.
things were at that time. And the concierge in that building, I remember, hearing her yell, "La guerre est finie, la guerre est finie, les Boches sont ici." The war is over, the Boche, they called them the Boche, the Germans. They're all here,
Oh my God.
So I don't know
Jesus,
exactly how, like a couple of days later, see what happened when they invaded places, it was the military first, the Wehrmacht, the German military. And then the SS and the Gestapo and all of the darkest of the darkest evil parts of the German, they didn't come until a little bit later to arrest people, to find people, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know how we were able to do it, but my mother and I said, we got to get back to Paris. So we got back to Paris,
Wow.
to that little place. By now, when we arrived in Paris, I remember seeing a little German plane flying around the Eiffel Tower with the Nazi flag on top of the Eiffel Tower. I remember that.
Funny thing is, that was Austin's grandfather flying that plane.
Could have been.
No way.
He's
Come
German.
on.
He is German.
He's a German bastard.
Do our due
My
diligence.
German relatives immigrated before any of that
You
went
sure
down.
about, buddy?
Yep.
Sure about that?
In between slavery and the Holocaust, my little German family came here, so we dodged both bullets. So
I think-
I'm not accountable for that.
I think they were in America during slavery. They had a hand in that. Then they went back to Europe during Nazism. I think
They
they
take
dipped
care
their
of
toe
business.
in the pool on both.
It's possible.
You make me sick, Austin. I'm docking your pay.
reparations.
So I want to get out of this whole war thing. I'll just
Yeah.
end up
No,
by saying,
I'm loving it, John. Don't
it's
feel
incredible.
hurt.
It's incredible.
It's a movie right now.
And one thing,
So
and one
what
thing I want
happened-
to
It is
hear,
a
John,
movie.
one thing I want to ask is, did
Yeah.
you and your mother, were you able to move free? Because you said you just went
In
back
Paris.
to Paris. And I'm curious
yeah,
if
we were
if
able
you,
to move free.
So you didn't look excessively Jewish.
No, not at all.
You
Look
weren't.
at me.
You weren't hunched
Yeah,
over
you
wearing
do
a
look-
yarmulke.
I would
No,
say you
no,
look
no,
German.
no. We were not. First of all, we were never
What'd you
Orthodox
say?
Jews. If anything, we were completely, like
fuck is wrong with you?
reform, not even reformed.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. My father, when I asked him years later, because my father was basically an atheist. He died in 1982 when I was working in Vienna, Austria. But that's another part of my story. And I said to him, why, this Jewish thing, he said, I don't believe in any of that. He said, Jews in Germany, people of our background and people of our whatever class, I hate to use that word,
Sure.
but just the only time we ever went to synagogue is like for deaths,
Right.
if somebody dies, or for births or marriages and stuff
there
like
we
that.
go,
We
yeah.
never. I didn't know what any of this was,
Right.
I'd never been to a synagogue while we were in Germany or any of that stuff. So we get back. So now in Paris, the Germans are occupied, and they're not going from house to house yet. But you had to be very, very careful, very cool. And all my mother was trying to do at that point is to find out, where's my father?
Yeah.
So you know how there was no regular services. Imagine this now.
Yeah.
If I was trying to get a hold of Leo and I'm sitting in, I don't know, Mississippi someplace or in France or wherever, and I don't know whether Leo's in Los Angeles, I would write a letter to the General Post Office, Los Angeles, Leo, et cetera, and then I would wait for weeks or months. And on the other end, if my father was in Marseille, she had heard, she spoke to somebody. I left off an important part. So when we got back to Paris, she was talking to some French people that she knew. And among that little group one day at a cafe, there was a man, and when my mother was introduced, he said, Destler? Oh, je connais cette... There was a doctor that I was stationed with near Grenoble in the French army.
So it was him.
And she said, oh, really? And my mother just said, what happened? He said, when France surrendered, everybody was released, and he and a bunch of other men were heading towards Marseille.
Oh, wow.
So when she wrote that letter, hoping, Bruno Dessler, Dr. Bruno Dessler, that was my father, care of General Post Office. She waited 3 or 4 weeks, and one day she gets a letter. She had to go to the post office every day in Paris, wait online, A to G, H to, hours of waiting.
Wow.
Imagine trying to sext under those conditions.
And one day there was a letter for her, and it was from my father. And it wasn't a letter. It was written on a piece of toilet paper.
No way.
Because there was no stationery.
Wow.
People don't imagine, when
Right.
they say, there's a shortage of, baby food or whatever. There was nothing at that
There was
point.
nothing.
Even
Not even
at
paper.
the beginning.
Was there a
So
streak
he
of
wrote
human feces
on a
it, too?
piece of toilet paper, I am safe. I think of you and our boy. Here's my address. Join me, etc.
Oh, my God. What a relief.
And that was it. So
They would have found me. I mean, if you did write in to find me in those days, I would have been at the local whorehouse, John. So it would have been easy to find me. They'd have been like, we know. Yeah, Leo, of course. He's a regular.
That was
down the
after.
street.
That was after he tried sexting all the princesses of Europe over telegraph.
But because it was so slow, I would get right to the point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just I need to stay in a brothel.
Do you like
for
doggy
weeks.
style?
Will
Yes
you
or
blow
no?
me without any sort of reciprocation?
Yes or no?
John, is it true your father signed that piece of toilet paper letter with a streak of diarrhea?
yeah,
That
probably.
was the signature.
Yeah.
Just a brown line.
Yeah.
Well, you got to multitask. I mean, you got to use things more than once.
Of course.
So
called
we
rationing.
ended up eventually going to and the address. I still know the address, 63 Rue Sylvabelle, 63 Rue Sylvabelle.
Wow.
And it was in the African quarter of Marseille, and it was this little building, and we went there from Paris to Marseille. There were no cars or anything. I remember being picked up at the train station in Marseille by a horse and driver with a big cart behind it, and through our steamer trunk. That's all we had at that point, because everything else that was shipped from Berlin to Paris was stolen by the Nazis. So they never had anything. So from the time we left Berlin, all we had was a big steamer trunk. You know what they are?
Yeah, all your earthly possessions go in the trunk.
Yeah,
I love Lucy.
Exactly.
Trunk.
I love
Exactly.
Lucy. That
So
was an episode.
that was it. So we had that, and I guess a few suitcases, and my father must have had 1 or 2 suitcases, and that was it. So we ended up living with my father, who was there on the top floor of this building. It had a big circular stairway. I visited that house, by the way,
Wow.
in Marseille. Like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, a girlfriend that I had at the time, we went to France, and I said, I got to get to Marseille. I worked in Europe for 12 years later. I'll tell you all about that later. And I'd never traced any of the stuff, throughout my life.
John, can I ask a question real quick? You
Yeah.
said that when you first moved to Paris, you had to blend in with the Parisians.
Yes.
You had to start speaking French, acting
Right,
French.
right.
When you moved to the African quarter of Marseille,
Yes.
did you have to start doing blackface?
No.
Did you have to start acting a little
No. But
black per
in
se?
the building where we ended up for a year and a
Yeah.
half,
Pretty good.
we ended up for a year and a half. at 63 Rue Sylvabelle,
Uh-huh.
living in one room with two women,
You're a piece of shit.
my mother, my father, and I,
Uh-huh.
a potbelly stove in the middle,
Wow.
an unbelievable amount of bed bugs and rodents, and it was
Jesus.
just like the worst of the worst. You can't imagine.
Jeez.
And no heat in the wintertime, sweltering heat in the summertime,
Jesus.
bed bugs, just the
Terrible
worst
conditions.
conditions. But you get used to everything, you know.
Yeah.
So my mother used to say, she was so stressed out from everything. She said, I used to be up almost all night picking bed bugs off your father and you.
Oh.
Damn.
Just to see, that. And we lived with these two other women.
Mhm.
And the woman who was the concierge of that building, there were just
It's crazy.
the three of us, these two women, Margot and Ella, and we all lived in this like a room and a half
Mm-hmm.
and a toilet in the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were two African guys living somewhere in the building.
King
Mhm.
Krog's
Were they
grandfather.
the, security guards?
No, they were not. I never really got to know them,
Mm-hmm.
but they were there, and they, I don't think the Germans were looking for any African French people that were there. You
Yeah,
know,
they didn't care, yeah.
They were just.
That's why
going
John
there.
was walking around with a sideways hat and a gold chain.
Yeah, he didn't care. He was blending in.